Mairin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into your journey and your story and everything that you're doing. I mean, I heard we met. Did we officially meet for the first time in San Diego?
Yes, I think it was the first time I saw you on stage. I heard your story, and I remember looking at my girlfriend who we were there together, and I said, I really want to meet him because I want him on my podcast. You have a fantastic story, and it triggered something in both of us, actually.
Yeah, and so we got to meet, and I heard your story, and I didn't say it then, but I was like, oh, I have to have her on my podcast, and I was like, I'll get to it, and so here we are. I'm just so glad to have you on, and why don't we start with who is Mairin today, and then we'll break down how you got there.
Mm. Ooh, who am I today? Well, professionally, you would think to hear that I am a coach. I'm a leadership advisor for women going through career transitions, personal transitions, making hard decisions, or really just, showing up visibly that really need a time to find a place and a person to help adjust them into that new season. So I do a lot of that advising and that coaching in that area. I also have a mastermind. I do events, I do retreats. I have a podcast, and I wrote a book recently. But more personally, I think really what I am is I'm just a person who's showing up, just trying to share my story of the things that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, I love it. And the impact you're making is incredible and I love watching it and seeing everything that you're doing. But obviously this all started from a place of burnout, illness, all
Mm,
that stuff. Why don't we dive into how you kind of
yeah.
found yourself burnt out, ill, bedridden, all those things, which now led to the impact you're making. But let's talk a little bit about how you found yourself there.
Yeah, so about 26 years ago, my husband and I, we had this great idea to start a company out of our little two-bedroom apartment, and it was in home services. So at the time, we were doing security, and later we added solar into it. But we actually, when we made this decision, we knew we had to make a certain amount of deals for the first week, and that certain amount of deals just went from being this small idea concept of a business to really what our dream was to make, this big impact. And sure enough, here we found ourselves just a few later in 34 states. We were running, multiple offices. We had hundreds of employees. At our highest peak, we were in the Inc. 5000. We won awards for our service, and we were doing great things. And I absolutely would say, if you were to ask me, I guess, I am an entrepreneur at heart. I'm high functioning. I just, I don't do anything halfway. And so I did. Nothing was halfway when I went. And as a leader, I ran myself actually not halfway, full force, fast forward right into a brick wall almost of chronic illness because what it really did is I thought that I was able to manage the stress and I was adapting to all of the change, and I did that for probably about must have been about 17, 18 years. And then with each story of resilience that you have as an entrepreneur, you think you've managed, and unfortunately a lot of that time, if you're not careful, you're kind of stifling that down and you're not actually managing it. And that's really what happened with me. I wasn't using my voice the way that I probably needed to. I was making a lot of high functioning decisions, between legal to running teams, between all sorts as an entrepreneur. And it started showing up very isolated until one day, I just could not get out of bed, and I in short was vomiting all day every day. I went from running 9 miles a day to 90 pounds, bedridden for almost 4 years,
Mm.
almost needing feeding tubes, and diagnosed with what's called gastroparesis. I had celiac disease, and I thought I was being very careful with my celiac. And I think between they actually call it idiopathic, but long story short, I wasn't, taking care of my body necessarily the way I should have. And that stress said no more. And so between the gastroparesis and a few other, comorbidities, when you have autoimmunes that they like to tap onto it, my nervous system basically just stopped functioning. And my blood pressure from, even in its controllable stages with medicine was still so high. I was at risk of heart attack or stroke at any time. I was 200 over 160 on average. And
Mm.
I just everything in me was really starting to fail. And so, here I hit that season of brick wall, and everything that I thought I was then, um, you no longer are. It takes everything from you and it forces you to really look at yourself and say, who are you? So even when you ask me, who am I? It's almost a difficult thing for me to answer because I have a title, but that season really stripped that down and it made me something entirely different and really took me on a journey of what my values were and how I wanted to show up next with whatever I had left. And so here today, I decided actually just a little bit ago that I was going to write a book, and it's called Rooted Not Rushed. And really what I wanted, in all honesty, and I look back at it now, and I'm so grateful for everything. I'm a pretty religious person. I'm grateful for God giving me the time and the opportunity to write the book because I actually thought if there's one thing I'm going to do left in this world, it's going to be leaving a legacy for my children and for other people, if this is all I have left. And, once again, I don't do anything halfway. I wrote a book and I'm grateful for this new season that I'm in. I still function a little bit with autoimmunes, and there's still something that shows up every day that won't change. But now I have a different purpose, and the impacts that I'm able to make with women who are, in their own business, in their own journeys, in their own chronic illness, and in other ways. I get up for it every day, and I love every opportunity I have for it.
Yeah, and to hear all that, it must have been terrifying to be bedridden for that long. And I know that the aha of like, okay, I want to change, I want to make an impact, there's so much more to me than just, the boss and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
what was it like when you were going through it, right? Because it had to have been terrifying every day, asking, am I going to wake up tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. They say there's stages of grief. And I think if, I look back, I say there's stages of being bedridden. The first year, I literally was so sick that, um, I would say I was actually a little angry when I reflect on it, actually. I was angry at the position that I was in because I could no longer go the route that I was trying, and I kept trying to control it. I kept trying to be the leader that I thought that I was. And, I could control my way and control my health and figure out and solve this one too. And after a year of not being in that, the next year, I think I spent about a year grieving and my poor mom, she was always there by the phone, probably more at concern every time the phone rings. She was panicked, thinking that there's something wrong. But truly, probably 90% of the time, those phone calls were, Mom, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I need to understand what I'm doing with this. Like, what's the purpose of this? Why did God give this to me? And, really, what am I supposed to do with this life? I don't know how to show up in this, and I don't know who I am. And I'll be really frank with you, imposter syndrome hits and all the other things that really when you're being questioned for all you are and all you want to be and everything else in between sitting on the bathroom floor being sick every day. Yeah, I hit rock bottom. And then there was actually one night specifically, and I'm cautious to say it because I wouldn't say I necessarily wanted to die, nor did I want to give up per se, but I did. I was really having difficulty going on in the way that I was. I didn't know how to continue to be sick, and I was done and I was tired. And I remember sitting there thinking, not to make this whole thing about a religious thing, but truly I was sitting there, whether it be, someone else has a higher version of, their God, higher being, or just the universe. Like, what is your purpose? What is that? And for me, it was, all right, God, I don't understand this anymore and I don't know what to do. And so I give up. I give it all to you because I'm not doing it right. And ironically enough, there was a show on TV, and again, not to get too religious, but it was actually who's now my pastor. He was doing like a 2 a.m. service that they play on record, when there's nothing else to go on TV. And I vaguely really sat there in very little energy and just listened to it and really just thought, all right, like if this is what rock bottom feels like, I get it. And I remember, in fact, the word of or the theme of the sermon that he had that day was to empower and to expand. It was expansion. And I remember saying, "All right, expand me." And I was at the time, I mean, ask my mom, I went from she brought over this old keyboard at one point that I had had when I think I was in fifth grade trying to take piano lessons. And, I was looking for hobbies. I was looking for things to do every day. And I was still trying to show up on somewhat on Zoom calls with my team just to, be supportive. And, I was just trying anything to have purpose. And I was looking, I mean, I was drawing, I was playing the piano. Even my mom, I called her and I had this big clump of clay sitting on my bed actually one day with one of those little desk beds. And I was just looking for something that gave me an answer to what I'm supposed to do with this time and with my life at that point. And I remember getting up out after being on the floor that night and being so sick, crawling back to bed. My poor husband kind of rolled over and was like, "Hey, I'm here for you one more time." And he went off to work, which at that time wasn't very far. It was just into the next room. He didn't want to leave the house much to be away from whatever's going on. And thankfully,
Yeah.
had a team at the office who was taking over. But um, I started journaling everything. And that journal ended up being my book. I just
Mm.
threw it into the book and all the thoughts and all of the ways that I knew I wanted to leave that. And that's really how this whole new life that I guess I'm living now has started, and just showing up every day. And it's not about me, it's about knowing my kids are watching and knowing that other people need to hear that too. There's always something more than giving up. There's always something on the other side, and we don't understand it sometimes, but there really is purpose in sometimes all of that pain.
Yeah. And as high performers, a lot of times, our identity is what we do. It's not actually who we are,
Yeah.
right? My friend Brian Bogert always says who, not what, right? And it's so hard for people who've done something for so long to say anything else, right? You meet somebody at a conference or whatever, and you say, "Oh, tell me about you," and it's always like, "Oh, this is what I do," right? I'm a podcaster, I'm a speaker, I'm a this, I'm a that,
Right.
and that becomes your identity. And I've interviewed a number of retired NFL players on this podcast, and they go through it. Every single one of them went through it when they retired or were forced to retire, depending on what their story was. It's like they go through this stage like trying to find out who they are, and they have a really, really hard
Yeah.
time. And so that leads to the question of like, what do you say to these high performing women when that's all they are, right? Like they don't know how to identify as anything else. And by the way, this is also people who are just parents, right? Moms who are moms and go, I'm a mom. Okay, well, what about you? Like, who are you? How do you get that out of them? Because it's so hard to disconnect from that.
So first off, forgive me because I think somehow we had a glitch in our technology, so I didn't actually hear the whole question.
Oh,
But I think I think to answer that, from what I did gather, how do I extract that out of other people? I think it goes back to the truth of who we are. I will say that I'm very cautious uh, at who I am showing up every day. And standing on stages, being on podcasts, meeting some really great people who have their own stories, you do. And I think you said it, you meet people along the way, and I never want to become more than what brought me here. I never want to lose that part of my story because it really is who I am. It's what defines me every single day to get up. And so I think you have to take that truth of who you are and root in that. And why do you do things? Number one, what at the end of the day, take all of the logistics and all of the stresses and all the concerns out of it and look at your life and say, if everything else goes away and you had full control of your life, tell me what matters right here, right now.
hmm.
Because once you know that, then you can actually look at the next steps and you can say, okay, so let's take a baby step towards that and let's focus on that. And really, there's a lot of gratitude that I really work with. What are you grateful for right now? Because everything else that you're going on and everything that's being thrown at you in your life, whether it be business transition, whether it be, stress and teams or just life, maybe it's divorce or something else that you're going through. The reality is we all have something and we cannot control it. My mom used to say, don't borrow trouble.
Mm.
but we always try to control it. And the only thing that we really have control over is how we show up right here, right now, in the moments that we have, and to be grateful for them enough to take that as an opportunity. And what is that opportunity for you right here, right now? What does that look like?
I love that. A lot of times going back to all these high performers, right? They have these massive goals, which are great.
Mhm.
Goals are important. It gives you direction. You have to figure out the steps to get there. But one of the big things that I see, and it's worrisome, is they tie their worth to those goals, right? Like say that their
Mhm.
goal in a year is, hey, I want to make my first million this year. Okay, great. Let's figure out a plan to get there. But the problem is when they have their best year ever, but they don't hit the million, they're not satisfied, right? And there's a sense of like, you just had
Yeah.
your best year ever. Like, why don't we stop and we celebrate this? Is that a pattern that you see with the women that you work with?
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because I think that what that really looks like is what is their truth in that moment? And what are they hanging on to? Because in that season, they have a feeling and they have an emotion that they've attached to it. But in the end, is that really your overall goal to where you want to accomplish your life at the end of the day? And so, I mean, we go deep rooted into who you are, what you're about, and what do you really want to stand for at the end of it? Because really, as leaders, you take that leadership out. Who are you as a leader? And I always say, who are you? You know, the leader behind the leadership. Let's get down into the roots of that because life will change, businesses will evolve, industries will change. You know, you can be at your peak one day and something will hit you and it will change. You don't ever have full control over it. But what you can do as a leader is show up in it. I'll be honest with you because I've been my business that we started 26 years ago. I was sick and my husband was working from home. And, you know, we thought that this was going to be our legacy we have a few other businesses, but that was the one that I figured that would be what I left my children, that they would have jobs and that they would run and that, you know, we had this 10,000 square foot building actually, and that would be their home because that was my home for so many years. But I'll tell you, in my leadership story, it wasn't the full plan. It wasn't what I thought. In that same time, solar took a huge change. And, you know, you have to look at those seasons and say, what's your value of what you want to do with your life? And time is huge for us. And so do we just made this decision, and I will tell you there was some bittersweet obviously in letting it go, but we realized that after the season of working so hard for our health, for our family, and working so hard for the business that we had, do you continue to try and pivot again and again into, you know, we lost bankers, we lost so many different millions of dollars that we lost along the way just in trying to stay in the solar industry.
Mm.
And, you know, it was one of those things that we said leadership isn't always just in what you show up in right now. Sometimes, as a leader, the best leaders can make the decision to pivot, and that'll be your best success ever. And it leads you to your next one. And that's exactly what we've done. And, you know, we just did that recent. I'm excited for even some of those new adventures on that side of that business. But leadership is never what you think it will be, nor is life.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about your book here. Obviously, it's all about these learnings that we're talking about here. But my question for you is like, what's the experience people will go through when they read your book? And what do you want them to do as far as taking action after they read it?
Mhm. You know, I think the book itself, yeah, at the end of each chapter, there is a little bit of a work section where you can go through it yourself mentally. It's not just a read and go. I wrote it specifically in a way that you can refer back to over and over, no matter what season or no matter what thing you're going through. A lot of it is sharing a lot of my own stories of resilience, but then it puts you through a check of your own place and where you're at in your season and where you're rooted in, and is that in a place that has you grateful? Is it a place that has you aware of where you're at? Or are you living for your past? Are you trying to rush towards your future and trying to control all of that? So the book itself is not meant to just be a one read. It's meant to come back to as, you know, I wouldn't call it a manual. I would call it a companion, a friend, really, to help you root back into who you are in the seasons that you're in. And that's really what I hope for people to have out of it.
So while we're talking about it, where can people go to get the book?
You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my website, which is MairinMooreCane.com.
I love it. And so I want to talk a little bit more about what you're doing now with your coaching and your masterminds and all that stuff. Like, what is the outcome, right? So, who's the ideal client and what are they looking for?
The ideal, I would say not client. I actually call them a sister because I think we're all in it together. I'm looking for somebody who has been in the process of whether it be you're an entrepreneur or maybe you're an executive, maybe you're just a high functioning leader, no matter what that looks like, but somebody who is capable, who's doing things, growing in new positions, growing in new places, and somebody who's looking for some support or a place to grow with and help keep them accountable, keep them adapting in that place that they're in, and not lose themselves and burn themselves out along the way. Because that's really the biggest key is getting through the resilience that way is how do you manage all of it?
It's amazing how, you burnt yourself out into an illness. Like that's something I can't even wrap my head around. We talked, a couple weeks ago and I was like, I work 2 to 3 hours a day. Like I'm good. I try and keep the stress away, like however that works. Like how have you changed since then when it comes to running these businesses that you and your husband are running together?
You know, I think we're all in a place now where we're very aware. I mean, like I said, we were hustlers. In fact, I think some of our old past memories, people thought we were probably crack addicts in the middle of the night. We would finally be home at like 11 o'clock and we're trying to seed our grass, to at least have some sort of a personal life to enjoy on the weekends. And we maxed out our time as best we could. And our kids tagged along on all the adventures. But, there are other people out there who are really struggling to show up at work every single day. And it's not just 2 to 3 hours or even 9 to 5. There are people right now, especially in the economy that we're in right now, that are just trying to make it by. And while sometimes we don't have the answers necessarily to how to solve the problem of how to show up in all that we're doing, what we can do is show up in ourselves and be careful with how we show up in that. And, for me, I have to really adjust my time. I have to really adjust my pace in order not to burn myself out. So for me, it's, I do start my days a little bit early, but I also accommodate for what my body needs in certain ways. I patterned it enough to be able to journal and know where my body has maxed out and when to say absolute no. And I think that's really getting down to the nitty gritty of where are you saying yes when maybe you should be saying no in commitments or things in your life. And clearly, there are times that we cannot, but how do you show up in that? Is there a way that you can balance that? So it's really about the choices that we make within the things that we're choosing to do.
Yeah, I love that. And self-awareness is so important.
Mhm.
Like I learned self-awareness because of the environment that I grew up in. So I started super young being self-aware, but I wish that that's the one thing I could gift everybody is
Yeah.
self-awareness. Like you, like you have to look at the mirror every once in a while and figure out what you need. And especially as entrepreneurs, like we give and we give and we give, and we know we never take time to go, okay, well, what do I need? And that ends up obviously burning you out, and sometimes to a place that is almost deadly, which is
Yeah.
terrifying to think about. But I want to ask you a question I ask every single person on this show. It's a two-part question. The
Okay.
first part is, what is your definition of success? And the
Mhm.
second part is, what are three things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
What is the definition of success for me? Really, at the end of the day, if I can show up and live my life in the best way possible of being the happiest to whatever's thrown my way, being grateful for the most that I can, not being able to control everything. You just have to get through your days sometimes. And so I think it's always health, it's my faith, it's my family, and it's what impact I can give back. And that to me is success. And if I have an option to do that every single day, then I've done the very best of my life living it to its fullest. And how do I do that? Three things. Let's see. I, number one, I get up and I give myself 5 minutes for myself. It puts me back into my roots of who I am to start my day in calm. It allows me time with God to say, I'm grateful for this one day that you gave me more. And I actually have timers on my phone that I do that throughout the day. I give myself 5 minutes and just say, I just need a minute to breathe and be grateful for this next minute that I have. And because we're thrown, sensory disorder, all the things that we have to do all day, every day. So that's one. Another thing that I really am careful of is to make sure that I tell people that I love them. And also that if, even the strangers on the street, I like your hat because that's the impact that we're making. That's what we have to give. And some people will say, well, I don't have a lot to give. I don't have a lot in life. Yes, you do. I think we are in a society so much anymore that we, especially after COVID, we don't look each other in the eyes as we're crossing the street, even. And really, what we need in life is other people. And I think that we have lost that touch along the way. And so for me, impact is big in just you know, meeting your community, making sure that you show up in the presence of every single day, even if it's leaving a post-it note on the gas station to say, I see you, it'll be okay, or just something to show that you've made an effort into this world. And then thirdly, I would say I give myself at the end of the day a time to really reflect and to look back at what was, not knowing that I can control everything. I can't make life perfect. And really to say, if this is it, then I'm okay with this. And tomorrow I'll hope to I'll hope to get up again and do this again. And again, it's really finding gratitude in every moment of your day
Yeah.
because we don't know how much time we have.
It's so true. And I actually recently saw a reel and it was a monk talking about how life is only one day. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
you were born on one day, you will
Mm-hmm.
die on one day, and today is the one day of life, right? Because you aren't guaranteed. And it's such a perspective of just being present and then even taking that moment to reflect back and be like, what did I do right? How did I, what win did I give? Whose life did I impact? All those things. And so ever since I saw that reel, it's just been playing over and over again in my head because that's it, right? Like we can't if you live so much in the future, you're always stressed out, right? And so just be present, be where you are. And I think it's such a beautiful thing. So I love that you do that at the end of the day, with the idea of like, hey, I might not have tomorrow, but if I do, I'll wake up grateful and we'll move forward. I think that's such a beautiful way to do it. So I want to ask you the question where we're going to fast forward to the end of your life. Hopefully it's 100 years from now, but we're going to fast forward to the end of your life
Yeah.
and everything you've created, the podcast, the book, everything you've created has disappeared. And you can only be remembered for one sentence. What would you want that sentence to be?
Gosh, you come up with some great questions. Thanks. Take it all away. We were sold a hustle culture long ago. And I think we need to go back to what's more than just hustle. And it's what we can give because that's what it's about. And so for me, at the end of the day, if that's all I have left is to give back in whatever I can, I get, it's not one sentence, but you know, God didn't create Adam and Eve as just one. He made them together because we need people, we need community, and this hustle culture really needs to slow down enough to realize that we really need each other in the world, in the transitions, and in the life that we're making, and in the impacts that we're all giving. We're all leaders in a certain way, and we're all just trying to make it here in this world, aren't we?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how can people find you, work with you? What's all the good stuff?
Well, I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I don't think I'm on TikTok very often, but it's all under Mairin Moore Cane. But you can also find me on my website, which is mairinmorecane.com. My podcast is another great way, which is Root, Realign, and Rise, and another way that you can listen to stories of resilience and find ways to connect with me there.
I love it. So, like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is in your life, what's been your biggest moment of growth?
Hmm. My biggest moment of growth has been going from what we think that we were to realizing that we are constantly evolving and constantly growing, and who we thought we were isn't always what we will be. And it's finding yourselves rooted in who you are deep down in those truths and in those values to show up the best you can, living it to the most you can through its growth.
I love it. Mairin,
Through
thank you so
being
much
alive.
for coming on my show and sharing your journey with my audience. And thank you, more importantly, for sharing your gifts with the world because it's needed. And I love that you're showing up in the way that you are.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for having me.